Hello, and welcome to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast. This podcast is all about equipping, encouraging, and inspiring youth pastors weekly with topics that are brought to the table by youth pastors from all over the world. And now, here's your host for this week, Brent Aiken. Hey, and welcome to the podcast. If this is your first time listening to us, we want to welcome you and invite you over to our website, studentministryconversations.org, where you can find all of our previous episodes, show notes, and our blog articles. Our goal is that you are inspired, encouraged, and the things that you hear on this podcast can equip you to be a better student pastor for the church that you're serving in. So today we are sitting down with Zac Workun. He is the youth pastor guy from Lifeway.
Oh man, that's so
I guess the youth pastor guy. I mean, you might have a team.
We'll get
but
into
I mean,
it.
like
See. We'll see. Yeah.
Your name is the headline on Lifeway. I'm just saying.
Pending,
So, but with that, like, let's dive into this. And Zac, before we get into our topic for the day, why don't you tell us a little bit about you, where you're from, what you're currently doing, how you got into what you're doing, because I know a bunch of youth pastors are probably interested in that. And just whatever you want to share about yourself.
Yeah, man. But hey, so glad to be here today. Coming to you live from my garage. So don't be fooled by the wall behind me. This is the home office that is the corner square cubby that my wife has let me carved out for the home office. One of the things about working for Lifeway is that we are a fully remote company. We have our fun HQ in Brentwood, Tennessee, but everybody's office is wherever they happen to be in the whole wide world of sports. And so even our CEO's office is his home library. So literally working out of the office at home in the garage when we're not on the road or in Brentwood for things. And so I do serve as the student ministry specialist. My tagline, Brent's always that I like to say that I'm a student of student ministry, and then hopefully a pastor to youth pastors. My knowledge and wisdom comes in the aggregate of serving and learning from a lot of youth ministers from across the country. And so always happy to learn, hear, share, report back some of the things that we're working on and doing. So worked as a local youth minister for almost 20 years in Oklahoma, North Carolina, and then back to Oklahoma, where we are here in Tulsa right now. So I actually left the spot I was at as the full-time youth minister at a church here in Tulsa to take the job at Lifeway, in part because of podcasting. So big shout out to youth ministry podcast lovers and listeners for our Youth Ministry Booster podcast. And so got to be a part of the team for Lifeway for the equipping, the training, consulting stuff that we do for building up, encouraging youth ministry folks, but still volunteer in my local church. Literally out that window is my back porch where we smoke meat for the high school boys that meet twice a month that come over to our house. And then my wife and I are mercenary Sunday school teachers for kids, adults, and students as often as we're called on. So we are the folks that now get the emails that you send out with the curriculum, the topics, the ideas, and the lessons that you want us to teach. So love being on both sides of it. And so excited to be here today.
Yeah, and I think you have a really, really dynamic perspective because, like you said, you've been in youth ministry for 20 years. Now you're a student of student ministry, or however you said,
Here
which
to
is
learn,
a really cool way to say that. And so just the mindset behind this is with the topic today, I think it's a really, really cool perspective that you'll bring to the table. And that is when we started talking about this, we were just like, leadership. Let's talk about leadership. And it was like the conversation was like, we really haven't done like a leadership fails,
what not
and
to
how
do,
and how to avoid them episode.
Oh, you're gonna have fun
and
with
so
the clickbait title, I'm sure. Yeah.
Dude, I figured this would be a really, really cool opportunity to maybe for the younger youth pastors, maybe you get to avoid these pitfalls,
or old,
and for the more experienced, or the more experienced and veteran youth pastors, you're like, oh yeah, I did that one, like that. That's
commiserate, my brother, my sister, commiserate.
Yeah, exactly. And so from that though, like just I guess. Let's start with just an overall view of the importance of leadership within the actual youth ministry context. And that can go from like us as the youth pastor to laying leadership down to our volunteers, and even jumping into student ministry, because I think all those are different dynamics of leadership. But like, what is leadership within youth ministry context? What does that look like?
Oh man, so youth ministry is this really unique crucible of being pastoral and mentoring for a group of students that are passing through a rite of passage through a set of years that are formative in their life. And that's one of the things that I think draws us to it, is being a teenager is always formative. Like who you are at 12, 13, 14 is hopefully not who you are at 17, 18, 19. Like we are hoping to come out of the other side of the hero's journey of being an adolescent into something more than we started as. And so I think that's what draws a lot of folks to youth ministry. What keeps it really exciting. One of the things that I want to talk about is I think that sometimes we can lose perspective and mingle our journey and their journey. So one of the things that I would encourage every youth minister is have the right expectations for those you serve. You, as a 22, 32, 42, 52-year-old youth ministry leader, should be on your own journey and growing and deepening and maturing in the ways of faith. But 13-year-olds are going to have a lot of the same questions every year that 13-year-olds have, which should make you a really good guide and mentor 20 years into it. But I think one of the temptations is to take them on our journey instead of mentoring or guiding them on their journey. And so this is where sometimes I hear youth ministry folks get really like obsessed about, like, this happens typically for those that are like finishing seminary or have really taken or done a deep dive on a particular topic, and they want to take them into the depths of what this theological tangent means. And there may be some interest from your students for something like that. I just hope that it's always rooted in some of like both your plan and their concern, and not just a passion project of yours. And I think seeing yourself in the right role or relationship as the mentor and guide, you are Gandalf. You are not one of the hobbits. You are leading along the way. Yeah. So.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's a really good point. And I think a lot of youth pastors kind of fall into that perspective. Just the idea of like, man,
if it matters to me, it must matter to them. Maybe.
Exactly.
I mean,
and I've fallen into
yeah.
that too.
Yeah.
When I went back to school to get my master's degree, it was one of those things that was like, did you know this? Like,
yeah, right.
I mean, but it's,
yeah.
It's hard to share, like, it's hard to condone that, but we kind of have to at the same time, because just because it's your passion doesn't mean it's theirs yet.
But
it can be
passion,
in the future,
though. Yeah, that's right. That's right. The passion, though,
definitely
is something like whatever gets you that excited, like that is the thing that you want for your students. So a little bit, this is where it's tricky, because like the more passionate you are, the more that can be contagious. I just don't know if it will be for Koine Greek like you want it to be. It may be for Minecraft, but that's what's okay. Like they're 13, they're allowed to be really excited about stuff. But I think like guiding and directing, like listening for, guiding, directing passion, and then exuding it too. Like that's one of the things. Because my other worry for a lot of youth ministry folks is that they are leading from a place that's flat. Like they have lost the zeal and the passion, because the other hand. So if one hand is being passionate about where you are, not where they are, the other hand is just kids today, right? They'll grow out of it. No, man, like you need to be as excited for them, champion for them. Every like if you aren't excited to be excited for them or to champion for them, then maybe that's the moment to consider, am I serving in the right place? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, and I definitely think that there's no limit to the level of education that you have, but you have to make sure that you're explaining and revealing to their level of education in the process.
So and my teacher wife would talk about scaffolding. That's right. So have the right ladder.
Yeah, scaffolding, 100%. Yeah, having the right ladder. Very much. So a leadership, it's a great it's a great context and a great opportunity to bring those passions in. But I would say another thing to go with that is just this mindset of remember when you were a junior high student or a high school student, and remember the things that you were passionate on back then too.
Dude, keep your yearbooks close by. Keep your yearbooks close by.
Yes, for sure.
That is your looking glass.
And just the mindset of like, what were and granted, I mean, I say this with a grain of salt because I don't remember half of what my youth pastor did. I just remember that he was there.
But, we'll come back to that, my friend.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. But the things that stuck out to you, the things that were like monumental to you understanding faith at different levels, like make sure that you have the same passion portraying those again, even though you might have learned them a while ago.
That's right. That's
So,
right.
but yeah, do you want to go into the be there now, or do you want to come back into
Okay,
that?
let me say the hot take, and we'll see if we lose the audience.
I didn't want to steal your thunder.
One
I
of the
mean,
major fails for most youth ministers is caring too much about your sermon. I'm sorry that you putting in the difference
wow.
between 8 hours and 15 hours preparing a 20-minute talk. Listen, brothers and sisters, I had one of the best, like most theologically rigorous youth ministers that I could have had. And I only remember 2 sermons that he taught. One, because he used a movie clip that got him in trouble, and 2, because he said some really dramatic things. I don't remember what the content was. I remember those moments. But what I
Yeah.
do remember is who he was and the conversations sitting on the edge of a golf cart at camp and sitting in the cleanup, like we were cleaning up in the aftermath in the afterglow of camp. I remember those conversations much more than the content of his sermons. And
Yeah.
so if you were trying to win the room with the extra polish on your sermon, I would caution, should you prepare? Absolutely. But if the question is an extra 3 hours on the sermon, or another coffee with a student, choose the coffee every time.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, I don't remember half of the lessons that my youth pastor did.
Yeah.
Honestly, I probably remember 3, 4, and most of them were around music or some really cool visualization.
Yeah, it was some graphic, right? It was some
Yeah,
visual or that's
yeah,
another sidebar.
something
People are
that
not doing that
captured
enough.
the
Yeah.
yeah, something that captured the mind. But the thing that I do remember more than anything else is like I remember, like you said, I remember the times at camp. I remember he wrote letters to every one of us at
Okay.
camp.
Okay.
I remember he invited us. He did something that they called chill, and we were just invited to his house every Monday
Yeah,
night
yeah.
for 2 hours. And like, man, this was back in the time, which granted, younger youth pastors, I'm sorry, but this was back in the time where we would all like lug our TVs and an Xbox and everything else, and we'd do LAN parties at his house where like we'd connect like 5 or 6 different Xboxes and we'd play Halo for 2 hours. And he was
Hey
just
man,
like,
you still can. You still can.
yeah, you can.
I just got
But
done
it was
watching
just,
the World Championships with my boys for a mobile tablet game, and it was held 6 of them all in the same room with a big audience. So yeah, make the
yeah,
living room LAN party great. Yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, and so, but with that though, like they're gonna remember the times that you were there and the times that you cared or the times that you showed interest far more than the times that you did the killer sermon or the killer lesson or anything
Right.
to that nature.
Well, and the
So,
secret sauce is the longer you do this, the more the times that you felt like it wasn't great are the times you actually will get the compliments of like,
dude,
you
for
just really
real.
spoke to us tonight. And you're like, are you kidding me? Again, do prepare, do be ready.
Yes.
But when you get to those last few moments, and again, part of this too, and this is a sidebar, Britt, like we should always be getting better at our craft. And so my hope
Yeah.
is that by year 12, you are writing a sermon, preparing content, like in the same way that like editing a podcast, hopefully you're faster now. Like, hopefully after doing this for a few years that we're getting more streamlined at the thing that we are doing
Sure.
more often. And so for the folks that are still taking 12 to 15 hours to write a sermon 10 years in, I'm like, man, like let's again, some weeks are tricky. It's a hard passage. You got caught up, got behind, but this is something that like you should
Yeah.
know about what it takes to get it done. So don't get caught up in the sermon more than you get caught up in the opportunities for connection. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I'd also say don't get caught up in your own voice either.
Woo, come on now.
And
Come on now.
because one of the things that I've done for a while now, and I've really, really found that this is one of the most compelling and one of the most, like just time and time again, just fondly remembered and things that kids talk about all the time is in high school. Like we are 9, 10 weeks into this semester, and I have taught one lesson this semester. I teach the high school. I have
Yeah.
taught one lesson this semester.
Okay.
I have had
Okay.
high schoolers teach,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I have co-wrote with high schoolers every single week for this entire semester. And so we are in our 3rd different high school student teaching. They're teaching on topics that they're passionate
Love
about.
it.
I'm being there when they need support.
Yeah.
I'm stepping out of the way when they don't. And I'm allowing them to teach their peers because, as once again, from the education perspective, when you teach something, you learn it 10 times better the retention and
Yeah,
the
you do.
ability to relate it to other things, you can't match teaching it to other people. And
Yeah.
so taking that to heart and just using this as an opportunity, part of the job as a youth pastor doesn't necessarily mean that you have to preach every sermon, but you're there to equip the person that is.
Yes.
And you're there to bring people, or you're supposed to also equip other people to teach the gospel too.
Yes.
And so very, very important, but it's a lot of fun too in the process. I love
Oh,
these semesters. I do it every now and then. And it's fun to see the high schoolers get passionate about what they're actually talking
yeah.
about. We're doing a series on worship right now with one of the high school girls leading it. And I was like, how many weeks do you think you need? Like 2, 3? She goes, no, 5. I was like, okay.
She ready.
It's like, all
What?
right. And we
Well,
just got off of a series on apologetics before that, where a high school junior literally led 5 weeks of apologetics. And it was just like,
Well, because I think sometimes, I mean, youth pastor, youth minister, like preaching and teaching is a function, not your role. And I think that's one
exactly.
of the things we serve in a multitude of ways. There are
Yeah,
various relationships, and equiper is one of those. In the same way that you want students to grow in their faith, one of the areas to grow is to be equipped enough to take on the challenge of leading and teaching their peers. And it can't just be us that always is again, I get there's a certain kind of authority for those that speak over, but there's a lot of ways to craft that authority
sure.
beyond just maybe a lesson moment. I think there's got to be a more expansive understanding of both our pastoral time and program time would allow for some bandwidth that way. So I love hearing that.
Yeah,
Again, a student gets a chance to teach. Oh man, you
yeah,
may awaken something in them of a calling that they didn't even know
exactly.
until the chance was laid before them. Yep.
Well, and we are called to, as pastors, we are called to equip the people that we
Yes.
have,
Yep.
not to bring everybody to us so we can be the
The
saving
megaphone.
voice that
Yes.
brings
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yep.
And
If
so the
that's the
more that we
case,
equip,
just start a
yeah,
radio show. Yeah.
yeah, the more that we can equip students to actually know what they're talking about and get out into the world and share it, the faster that Jesus is going to come to the communities around us.
Yes, that's right.
But very, very cool. So obviously that is a big one. Your sermon does not need to take 12 to 15 hours a week.
Yeah.
Hopefully by now you have
Hopefully you're getting better.
very,
That's
very
right. That's
much,
right.
yeah. You've learned how to make that a little bit more of a concise time in your week.
Yeah.
But so other failures. What are we looking at?
Man, going it alone like this, and this is
Mm,
twofold. Number one, inside of the local context of your ministry, like there are a lot of people that I've met along the way that lament that they don't have help. And I can
yeah,
get the feeling, but to not be swept up in the feeling and to start looking for help, whatever it takes. Like this is, don't be so wound up in the work of the ministry that you aren't finding ways to share the load of ministry. It is the fastest recipe for having all the pressure or the choke point or the pinch point on you. The
yeah,
ministry either happens, like if you are sick on a midweek and you have to stop ministry because if you're not there it can't happen, that is a really good indicator that you are not building towards a healthy ministry.
yep,
There has to be somebody else other than just you and your spouse and one lucky or unlucky person that you like cajoled into it. Because if it doesn't matter, if it matters to the church enough to hire you at whatever level of part-time, full-time, or whatever, then part of it mattering to the whole church is not just to staff it with a person, but to support it with those that can help lead in it. Now they may not know what they're doing and you may have trouble finding them at first, but this is the partnership, again, not going it alone, with your senior pastor and with the rest of the church to find those and to find the creative ways in which they can serve the students. They may not feel ready to teach or lead, but they may love to prepare food or to chaperone or to pray with students or mentor students. Like it's on you to think through the creative ways that you can invite others into it. They can't do your job. That's why they didn't sign up for it. But if they care about the next generation, and that's an important thing for you to bring up, how will you give back to the next generation?
yeah,
It matters. The second half is to not go it alone with other youth ministry leaders. One of the things that I know for podcasts like this and conversations that we have in student ministry, one of the key indicators, and I wish it was more complicated than this. People that stick around in youth ministry the longest, it has less to do with the church the students or their senior pastor, and more to do with the community they felt of fellow people that were called in youth ministry. There is
Yeah.
some other church in your complex, in your community, in your metro. It is on you to try to connect with those folks through a Zoom, a phone call, a text group, a coffee club, just to hear about the work that you're in. Again, it's tricky work because youth ministry is ministering to the next generation, but you need peer relationships that understand your calling in a way to bolster you beyond just the ebb and flow of how ministry is going every week.
Yeah, no, and we've had a couple episodes in different regards when it comes to that. Obviously, if you've listened to the show for a while, National Network of Youth Ministry is a
Yep.
place to go.
Great crew.
Um, Great crew. They have directors all over the United States, and you can go to nnym.org and literally type in your location, and they will show the closest registered network to you that you can get plugged in with local guys. And now sometimes that might not be the case, but the other aspect of this is they want to grow that too. And so if you get on there and you're like, hey, I don't have any,
Yeah.
maybe you're the person to start that, and maybe you just need to go to the other churches and say, hey, I would you want to go grab coffee once a week?
I'll host. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'll host or do something to that nature. Our youth pastor community in Abilene, where we live, we have probably 35 youth pastors in our network, and I would say probably anywhere from 12 to 15 of them meet monthly.
That's great.
And it's really, really cool. And it gives great opportunities for us to not only network and share highs and lows with each other, but we also have opportunities to collaborate, share resources, do all those things that, like you said, makes you not in this alone. Because if you have this idea and you have 4 other youth pastors that you can throw as a sounding board off of, and you're like, hey, what do you think about this idea? And someone's like, don't do it. Like, that was a
Yeah.
terrible idea. Or like, I did it, man. My students loved it. Make sure you do this, this, and this. Kind of thing like that. Having those opportunities are really, really cool. And I don't know if you were going to go into this, but the other aspect of that is cohorts. And cohorts have now kind of popped up here and there all over. We've been posting on social media as of late that we are going to start a cohort. We're going to start small. And we're going to start with one and then hopefully build from there. But cohorts are great opportunities to where even if you don't have anybody local, you can get online and join a network of youth pastors from different places in the country, where you meet weekly over video calls and have conversations that still equate to your ministry. So yes, don't go in it alone. You have
So
to
not
network with
alone
youth
in your
pastors.
local context or in the community of the call, to not go it alone. The next
Yeah.
one, Brent, that I want to give, and this relates a little bit back to the first one, is know what you actually want or hope for your students. One of the things, one of the biggest fails for a lot of youth ministers is to be obsessed with the wrong numbers. Or let me say it in a more gracious way, to think that numbers don't matter. They do. I just
Yeah.
think sometimes we don't have a robust enough understanding of what numbers we're even calculating. So we
Yeah.
we default to maybe the only numbers that are like visible or available. Growth in ministry means what we define it to mean in the ways in which we are pursuing it. And so if left unchecked or undefined, we'll default into, well, how many people were there at their capacity? But youth ministry, by its nature and by research of asking youth ministry leaders, is about relationships. And relationships grow not just by number or expansion, but by depth. And one of the things that we hope for in the work of making disciples in their teenage years is that they would be deep in the ways in which they grow and understand and love and care and look more like Jesus.
Yeah.
You, as the youth ministry leader, pastor, shepherd, should have a pretty good or clear understanding of how to help them grow. I think sometimes youth ministers get obsessed with the growth of their youth ministry instead of focusing on the growth of the students in their ministry. Like, it's not just about having how many Stephanies can be in our youth group, but for those that have been entrusted to you, how are they growing this year more than last year to look like Jesus? And so I think spreadsheets in youth ministry matter a great deal. I just think
Yeah.
we need to have many more names associated with it than just the count or the attendance. I want to hear about the ways in which there are middle school and high school check marks and checkpoints for like growth and this and that. And, have they been baptized? Do they have a written account of their testimony? Have they had a gospel conversation with a friend? Do they pray out loud with their family? Have they read the Bible all the way through? There's 1,000 things that could be
Yeah.
growth indicators and markers for student ministry. But if we don't define them, we'll devolve back into the one that maybe we are frustrated with because we didn't do the work to actually lay out what we were trying to get to. I promise you, students that are growing deeply will also grow wide.
Yeah, no, and that's phenomenal. And I think, like you said, those measurements are super super important. Kenny and L Campbell, with Grow, stuff you can use, all their different things that they've done. They had a way that they coined it that I really really like, and we've used this metric for probably the last 10 12 years in my youth ministry. Is just, we win when students take their next big step,
Yeah, yeah.
whatever that looks like. And so, whether that next big step is accepting Christ for the first time, or maybe it's actually getting a Bible and reading it at home, or
Yeah.
maybe it's actually praying in front of the group, or maybe it's getting baptized, maybe it's sharing the gospel with a friend, bringing a friend to church with them, like all those different things. All of those are different aspects, and I think sometimes we kind of overlook some of those qualities. A lot of times it's like, oh, well, they're just bringing a friend. It's like, well, in order to bring a friend, that is a small taste of evangelism.
That's right. That's
Like
right.
I think sometimes we kind of misword those, or use bad terminology to kind of throw those or make those not as important.
Or
But all
leave them
those different
undefined.
metrics,
Like
yeah,
we talk
exactly.
we talk grandly about prayer or evangelism instead of saying, and again, the language of next step is so important if you're willing to define what that next step might look
Hmm.
like. And this is where that's actually some of the most powerful moments of moving preaching to application, is clarifying not just what the scripture says, but what it means in the life of a 14-year-old. Again, remembering back to, not what does it mean for the 40-year-old who's teaching, but the
Yeah,
14-year-old that is hearing and listening. What is their next step? And it may be, when they go home to their family, being really respectful of mom and dad. That may be a huge next step for a
yeah,
young believer that thinks that I can just be good at church and be cranky and sassy at home. Like, no,
yeah,
these things are measured and tied together in the same way that we don't just read our Bibles when Pastor Brent says open it. We read our Bibles on the regular, and here's ways that we can
hmm,
talk about it, and you can let us know because we care that you would do
yeah,
this. It's the it's the music lessons, right? Like, how many students have clarinet, saxophone, or violin lessons that, like, you kind of need to practice before your next lesson, but we don't always explain what practice could look like. And I think that's one of the things for youth ministry leaders. We love to proclaim the good
yeah,
news, but when you are the pastor, you aren't just preaching, you are shepherding and nurturing those next steps. So 100%.
yeah.
But when they take the next step, that's the win. The caveat I would give is helping make sure that we have a clear enough next steps that they know where to go. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing that I'd throw in with your kind of just like overall of like knowing kids and stuff like that, another thing that's really, really vital to have is, it's used in education more than youth ministry, but it's a really, really important context to have in youth ministry as well, is you need to have a scope and sequence of sixth grade through 12th grade in your
Yeah.
program. And
That
scope
help
and
that helps
sequence is
protect
just,
you from feeling frazzled because it's like we had a
yeah,
plan. We
yeah.
had a plan.
Yeah, and for those that might not be familiar with the term scope and sequence, basically it's, when they enter sixth grade what you're going to teach them, and
Yeah.
by 12th grade what they are going to know. So
Yeah.
like you have a roadmap planned out of all the things that you're going to teach, all the concepts that they are going to work to understand through different lessons, through interacting with different elements of media or whatever. And that's how most curriculums are built, is they have an idea, start to finish, and they just build the material to get,
Yeah.
build the road to get from one point to the other.
Yeah.
And so with that, yeah, like having a mindset of a scope and sequence is really, really important too.
Yeah. And again, that's the benefit of using some stuff that is more curricular. I know that for our Lifeway team, we have 4 different ones to choose from. There's been some others mentioned here as well. But just again, I think having a little bit of a plan to it is
Yeah.
the last thing that I would offer, Brent, is where most youth ministries often fail is they run too hard on tired. This is one of the quickest. If people are cars, one of the biggest diagnostic checks that I have for ministry friends is that when they're always busy or they're always tired, I'm always concerned.
Yeah.
Ministry is hard, but it's not complicated. And so when things are hard but not complicated, we have to compensate with the right amount of rest. We have to be able to refuel the tank so we don't
Yeah.
run on fumes. In the same way that we talked about, like your preaching may be less memorable than those conversations and those moments
Yeah.
of presence. Man, I hope that you are showing up more times than not with a pretty full tank to listen, to care, to be patient. That when a student is squirrely, you aren't trying to check out of there because you're so exhausted that you can't
Yeah.
even sit to listen. Because that is something that you will miss out on the best parts of ministry if you are always running frantic or on fumes. And so, whatever
Yeah.
that looks like, whatever it takes, not overcommitting to events, not over planning your schedule, not relishing the Sabbath days or half days or moments that you have, those all matter for your ministry too.
Also knowing how to say no.
It's the
Like,
healthiest yes you have. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. You have to say no.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
There are some things you cannot do.
little Betty from the adult ministry in your church is going to ask you if you can drive the church van for the women's retreat at XYZ, blah, 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 blah. Like, you have to be able to say no. Sometimes those situations are okay, but like, you have to understand where you are, what you need, and you have to have the ability to say no.
Yeah.
Now, granted, there's some context to that because if your senior pastor asks you to do something, you probably cannot tell him no.
Yeah.
Um, but like there has to be a healthy respect for that word, and you have to be using it pretty regularly too. But that goes
That's
into
right.
the exhaustion and tired thing. Is like most of the people that are exhausted and tired don't know how to say no.
There's always something more to do.
Hmm.
Hear Brent and I say it. There is always ministry that will go undone.
Yep.
That's it. It's okay. Do the things that you can do, that you're called to, in a way in which that's hard work, because it is hard work, but also healthy enough that you could pick it up and do it again next week. That's the last thing we need in a season of looking for quality, healthy, growing student ministers, is to have all of them burn out in the next 10 days to 10 months when we could have been doing this for 10 years.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
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 No, very much. So, any other youth ministry fails you want to go over?
Oh, man, not having enough fun. I mean, they're teenagers, man. Like sometimes I think don't take yourself too seriously. There are some young ministers that happen to be doing youth ministry that have forgotten the youth of youth ministry. I get it. You're very respectable. But at 15, you were also kind of either quirky or jerky or silly. So lean
Yeah.
in and know that part of being 13 to 17 comes with some silliness. Now,
Yeah.
should we keep kids safe and avoid pranks? And should you are, hear me say this on behalf of all of my friends. You are always the adult in the room, so be mindful and wise, but don't be fooled that some teenagers want to have a water balloon fight or want to impress someone by chugging a soda. That's part of being a teenager, and there is some silliness that comes with it. And so,
Yeah.
because they are silly, that means that you should be open to some constructive and organized fun. Not just
Yeah.
games. I think sometimes we limit fun by having it always look like a game that slots in before the first three songs. But fun in your ministry is a vital part because they are youthful. They are students and teenagers. They thrive on it. They connect around it. That's why they love being on teams and bands and competitions and extracurriculars. If it was just about the core curriculum of the 6 periods and lunch, then that's what school would be. But for so many of them in this season of life, the team they get to be on, the project, the championship, the trophy, the thing, like they love that stuff. They thrive on that stuff. I saw some posts the other
Yeah.
day in one of the Facebook groups about how one young minister has a year-round competition and his students eat it up because of course they love it. And so I think sometimes we can get so caught up in what we want them to know that again, we forget where they are. So if you aren't planning for fun, don't be surprised when nobody's not having any.
Yeah.
So
Well, and I
yep.
think the other thing with that is it's not cookie cutter. Like every group is going to do it differently. So
Yep.
you cannot just take someone's model from down the street and expect it to fully incorporate in yours, especially when it comes to games. Part of leadership is reading your crowd.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And if you have a crowd that is not high energy and not amped up, but they still like playing games, then make sure you do games that are going to be on their like level of entertainment.
Yep.
If you have, we do games, but the thing is like most of our kids, they don't want to do high energy stuff, but we still occasionally throw stuff in. But we do a game night once a
Yeah.
month instead of incorporating that into our Wednesday nights every single day, because that's the way that we found it works.
Yep.
And then we also are like, hey, flip the switch. Like, bring your friends to this. This is a great opportunity to get them into the church building. They have fun with us, and then invite them to Wednesday nights.
Yes, no, the
Or
entry
and
point for
so
that, the fun that may be seasonal, like, there may be some years that you have a big Super Smash Brothers tournament, and that's the
yeah,
thing. There may be some years that you have a big mega blowout dodgeball tournament. That's okay. Again,
yeah,
the fun is in response to maybe where they're at or where you're trying to nudge
yeah,
them to. Right, 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 and it may not be
yeah.
your brand of fun. Like, that's one of the
No,
things I think a lot of youth ministers are like, "Well, I wouldn't enjoy that." Well, hold on, buddy. They might.
yeah. And I
So,
mean, we
yeah.
do stuff from we do a live action Among Us night to where like
Yeah.
we literally set up the church as an Among Us game.
Yes,
But
yeah.
then we also
There's
do like a
nothing more
murder
creepy
we do a
control
murder
command center
mystery
than
dinner.
yeah.
I mean, and so like there are very, very different
Brent, is
dynamics
your
when it
church
comes to it.
haunted?
No, I have a theater major as an associate youth pastor,
Yes. Oh,
and
yeah,
so
bless them.
it's really really great. But yeah, so like just the dynamics of it is like different kids will do different things. Make
Yes.
sure, like
Yep.
you just said, make sure you're not just gearing it towards the hyper energy kids,
Yeah.
because you probably have other kids in your group, but make sure you don't hyper focus on them either.
Yeah.
There needs to be a good balance of everything. And so
Yeah.
we do video game nights where we just bring up a bunch of different video games. We do Nerf
Yeah.
wars. We
Yeah.
do all kinds
Organized
of stuff, but
play, man. Come on. Yeah.
we just
Yeah.
make sure that it kind of goes back and forth. We do high energy, we do flag football, but then we also come and like we used to do something called stress destruction, which that was our event, and we just taught them how to like basically disable stress in their lives through
Okay.
different like practices of like drawing and coloring and praying and meditating and
And smashing a
all
car with a
kinds of different stuff.
sledgehammer?
Well, not that far, but
I was hoping that's where you were gonna end up. Yeah, like,
yeah,
it's very therapeutic, it's poetic, it's artistic, and some of us just smash things with a hammer. No, that's good, all good.
yeah. No,
Just
my
breaking
my
boards with their hands.
we have one of
Yeah.
those entertainment venues now where you just go break stuff in
Yeah,
our town, and my
see?
wife
Yeah.
has been
Yeah.
wanting to go hardcore, and I'm like, I don't see the point in it, but different people different
Yeah.
ways. So but yeah, so
That's
with that
good.
being said, man, Zach, great stuff, and
Things
I
to watch
want
out
to
for,
leave
yeah.
I want to leave you with two last things. First off,
Um,
I kind of just end every episode with this, just the mindset of, hey, what is your advice to any and all youth pastors listening? And that can be on topic or off topic, whatever you want to throw out there. And then finally, how can people connect with you?
Yeah.
Basically, your 10 minutes of whatever you want to share, highlight. If you want to throw out some Lifeway resources or anything that Lifeway is currently working on, shameless plug time, man, that's all you. And then how people can connect with you if they want to reach out to you
Yeah.
after this podcast airs. But so first off, advice to youth pastors, and then how can we find you? How can we connect to you?
Man, we said it a little bit in the episode. I just would probably wanna double down on, lead in such a way that showing up for your students doesn't feel like a burden. I think there's a lot of youth ministry leaders that I know right now that are I think they are called, but at least in conversations, there is a tone of performing it and not just having it be an overflow of passion. And I don't think it's because they didn't ever have the passion. I think the passion has diminished. And so one of the things that I would encourage is we build a deeper capacity or reservoir for our passion by our own devotional life. And so we talk about with our team, it's a little bit like the water in the cup. If the water is the thing that we're refilling, that's the passion that we have for what we're doing. It will always empty out. So we just need bigger cups. And I think sometimes the bigger container, the bigger cup, the bigger water bottle comes from the depth of our own study and love and personal worship. Because it's really easy to do ministry. Like we do it enough. Again, back to that very first thing. If you've done it through a cycle of 6, 12, 18 years, you kind of know what to do. And that should build confidence and not complacency. And so it's my
Yeah.
hope that the passion would come from a deep, deep reservoir of your own just uh, love for what God has done. Like it bubbles to the surface what God has done and is doing in your life, so that when time spent with students, there is no fabrication or expert or sage, but you're just a guide that cares. So
Yeah.
that's what I would share. Yeah, man.
No, very, very good. And so how can we connect with you for those that
Yeah.
are listening?
Oh man. So Lifeway students for Instagram, Facebook stuff, everybody at Lifeway. So if you ever find a Lifeway person in the wild and want to talk with them, all of our email is first name dot last name at lifeway.com. So Zac, ZAC dot Workun, WORKUN at lifeway.com. That works for everybody on my team, all the way up to our president. If you know their first name and you have a period in their last name, that's them. Youth Ministry Booster or Zac Workun on Instagram. I always appreciate. Brent and I got reconnected over DMs in the Instagram. So
Yeah.
feel free to shoot out the DMs that way. I'm always happy to encourage and connect through those things, because that's just a fun place to share and connect and do. You can keep up with us on Youth Ministry Booster, both the podcast, that's Spotify, podcast, YouTube, all that stuff. We're always releasing episodes every week. And so, man, just I would say any of those things. Lifeway's making a lot of great stuff: books, Bibles, curriculum, short terms, camps, and other experiences. And so, give us a try on some of the ways in which we could serve you. We talked a lot about things like scope and sequence, devotional, Bible study, Bible literacy, camp experience stuff. There's a lot of things that we do, and so just trying to find the right fits. Would happy to connect with those things. And so, yeah, man, lots of cool things happening.
That's awesome. Yeah. And we'll have all those links and stuff that you can go check out, Zac, in the show
Love
notes
it.
for this episode. But then also just the mindset of like, if you want to reach out to Zac, go for it. If you want to reach out to me or one of the other hosts on this podcast, man, go for it. Our goal is part of us wanting to equip and encourage and inspire youth pastors is communication. And so reach out to us. We'd love to talk. We'd love to be a resource to you in any way that we can. But then also with that, as you've heard me say probably 100 times on this podcast, we also want you to be on the show. So if you are listening to this and you want to be a guest on the show and share your thoughts, we have people that do a youth ministry of 5 kids. And then we have people that are students of student ministry like Zac, where he is literally out there just on the front lines encouraging youth pastors on a regular basis. Regardless of what you're doing in youth ministry, we want to hear your thoughts and your experience and your wisdom from your time in youth ministry. So you can email me or Brent at studentministryconversations.org, or you can do podcast at studentministryconversations.org, or you can reach out to us on social media, send us a message, and we'd love to set up a time where you can come on the show with us. But we also just want to thank you for listening, and we would also ask that you just do your part and share this podcast with your friends that are in youth ministry, because we don't do paid advertising. We don't make any money off this podcast. We don't do anything other than it's literally for youth pastors that have a heart for youth ministry, and we try to do our best to get youth resources and content out to you guys. So hopefully you can continue doing what you're doing. So with that, thank you for listening, Zac. It's been a wonderful
So fun,
time.
bud. Yes.
Really, really enjoyed it. And for all you listening, we hope you have a great week, and we will see you next week.